Welcome, welcome, welcome to another Apprentice Lunch and Learn. I want to especially thank those of you that are watching live. To those of you that are watching the recording, a reminder that if you want to ask questions, you got to be here live. Just saying. I'm delighted to have Jonathan Fishman today. John has a great background in real estate. He focuses on creating value and growth through building relationships, mentorship, and entrepreneurship. He is the founder of Bizydev, a NYC-based Bizydev group that works with technology, product, service, and service companies to help them accelerate growth. He's been working with Zoe for how long now, John?
I would say a little less than a year.
Excellent. A little less than a year. And he's been just a terrific friend and partner to Apprentice. And, one of our core values at Apprentice is a mentorship. And I think, obviously, I'm the old guy always in the group, and I'm used to providing mentorship for not only apprentices but my amazing business partner Rob. But I would say really more than any other client that we've had, Jonathan has been a mentor to Rob, and so for that I am very, very grateful. Thanks for making some time today, Jonathan. How are you doing today, sir?
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy speaking to people in a recorded manner or where there's more than just me and that person on the line. So this should be fun.
Cool. So the title to our presentation is The Keys to Accelerating Growth. So we're going to get into that in a bit. But before we do that, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story, how you came to become an entrepreneur and sort of how you came to where you are today.
No, I'd be happy to share that. So I would say I always had the business bug, even when I was younger. I was always the type of person that I would say maybe was described as having a lot of ideas and maybe not knowing how to execute. And the ideas came from having a creative brain and just being, people oriented and forward thinking and kind of a disruptor. But it took me years later to kind of figure out how to be an entrepreneur on my own. And during that time, I worked for some great people, and I learned both soft and hard skills on what it meant to build a company, hire people, operationally, capital, deals. And so a lot of that rubbed off on me. And I always enjoyed being sometimes like a number two or someone that's more behind the scenes than being necessarily front and center. And then a few years ago, it was just like right time, right moment in my career to kind of step off or step away from day-to-day real estate and launch Bizydev. And with that, it's really like, full stack entrepreneurial journey that I'm living and breathing every day.
Nice. Well, welcome to the dark side here. And, it's great to have you. It's funny, I did a session a couple weeks ago on getting started in business, and I think that's very overwhelming to folks. But this is actually the perfect session to follow up on that session, right? Because once you've actually gotten started, maybe you've even got a customer or two. Well, now what? And as hard as it is to go from 0 to 1, and don't get me wrong, it's hard to go from 0 to 1. The vast majority of businesses never go from there. Never really grow. I think something like 4% of all businesses get to $1 million in revenue. And which is why, by the way, apprentices, we are continuing. We are still celebrating. For those of you that didn't know that we hit the $1 million mark this week, we are very, very excited to celebrate. And kudos to everyone on the team. Thank you, John. Kudos to everyone on the team that was part of that. And then, in terms of the number that gets to like, say, 10 million, it's of course far, far less. It's definitely under 1% of all businesses get to 10 million. So let's talk about how to grow. What do you see as the key levers when you're thinking about growth of a business?
It's kind of just to react to the way you described growth. It's one thing just also for this audience, so maybe I'm going to tailor it to who's hopefully on the other side here. Um, in my work history, where I was, as I was saying, an employee or part of an organization or had partners that I reported to or answered to every day, it really was like little wins and little growth efforts that years later allowed me, as kind of the person fully responsible for building the business, to reflect back on those micro moments, whether it was one project, one deal, one situation, because that's what builds your confidence and also allows you to learn what's needed to go from A to B or A to C or A to Z. Sometimes when you think about growth, you're thinking about, I need to get to the finish line or to this final place. And it's really more about, as we know, the journey and kind of checking things off along the way. And the reason that many businesses maybe don't succeed is the journey that they're going down. They're either too stubborn to follow and say, this is what I'm doing, no matter what anyone tells me or what I'm seeing or what's changing, COVID aside and things like that. Being nimble, understanding like the situation, reading the moment, and then always being, I'd say that the constant that thankfully has been more taught to me than I may have had it in my DNA, but it took me years and years of being like kind of trained as to what the expectation is from someone I worked for or reported to, is just being a workhorse and being relentless. And that can come in many shapes and sizes. But that's like the skill that working for someone else really makes me a better entrepreneur in a standalone way.
I love that. I think relentlessness is key. But I think a lot of folks get relentlessness confused with stubbornness. And to your point, they think that, refusing to fail and being relentless means must continue initial thesis forever, and that's going to work. And the reality is the initial thesis almost never works. There's pretty much never a time when an initial business idea turns into, a 6, 7, 8-figure business without massive change along the way. So how do you think you can? How can you train yourself? How can we train ourselves to be more nimble, to be more open to those types of changes?
I'm looking at my own experience. I could talk about maybe someone else's and how it could not apply to them or to me, but the kind of the thick skin that I developed, working on stuff that I thought was amazing, whether it was a brand, a logo, an idea, and then having someone that had the final decision to say that makes sense or it doesn't. And even if I, in my limited, experience at that moment, thought it was the best idea, having someone around me tell me it's not really battle tested me to validate things when I'm on my own. Even Zoe now, who's working closely with me, I hope she would attest to this. It's not an absolute position I take. If she has a perspective, even though she's, still in college and obviously hasn't worked as long as either of I have, you and I have, I listen to what she's saying. Ultimately, I think it's, having good listening skills is important to be an entrepreneur. In a nutshell, that's what it comes down to. And then having perspective to adapt or ingest the feedback that you're getting, both from your team and from outsiders, is obviously super important.
I love that. And I am a huge fan of listening for sure as well. So tell me a little bit about your own experience accelerating growth with Bizydev.
Yeah, what's really exciting for us is that we get to work with other businesses. So we are obviously that, by definition, maybe is an element of a service business. But what we do is really try and find great companies that are in the marketplace that have something that stands out from the competition. Because as a business development company, I personally and my team can get behind that uniqueness to ultimately push it into the right places in the market. So as I said earlier, my brain, some people may have said I was an idea guy early on, maybe outside of my day-to-day in real estate, because there we had to execute. But outside of real estate, I had a lot of great creative ideas. Now what works for what we do is I could find other great ideas that are out there where they're executing it or on the verge of doing so. And then we kind of attach ourselves to those businesses to help facilitate growth alongside them or on their behalf. So our version of growth is kind of unique because obviously everything we do for the benefit of our clients and customers and partners is by default helps our own business grow. So we're kind of on two sides of that growth equation.
Love it. I have a couple more questions. I think two or three, maybe four. And then I'm going to open it up to our apprentices who are watching live. So if y'all have questions, you can post them in the chat or raise your Zoom hand. Yeah, those are the two best options, I would say. So, so you came from the real estate, and when I think of real estate, the industry, I'd be hard pressed to think of an industry that I would better that is more cutthroat than real estate. Real estate is cutthroat. What's the number one lesson that you learned from the real estate industry that you think folks can apply to entrepreneurship today?
The real estate industry by default is a people industry. It's a relationship business. And I think that skill in any business is highly valuable. Not just, I was talking to someone this week where they had a group that I just by default called it a networking group. And we kind of then zeroed in on what does even a networking group mean. And this version of it, which really resonated with me, is that it's more about building a relationship, getting to know people, being a good listener, being helpful. It's not a transaction. And I think that was by just my nature, that was how I approached life and business. So even in a cutthroat industry, I tried my hardest, and that it kind of naturally fell into place to not be a cutthroat participant. Really try and find win-win outcomes. Today, I can say win-win-win in business development because there's a lot of three-party scenarios where we're involved, and then two other groups are bringing together. But the relationships that I spent a lot of time cultivating and establishing and originating in all forms, shapes, and sizes is kind of what I'm most proud about all these years later. And just to land the plane as it relates to kind of the apprentice world, dating back to like my first job when I was 22 years old, and we hired a summer intern, and the company hired a summer intern, they got placed in our group. I always enjoyed spending time with them, being a mentor, sharing insights, trying to make them better, where it was never coming out of my pocket or hurting. I never viewed it as if they win, I somehow lose. And through the last 15, 20 years in business, I probably mentored close to 100 summer associates, let's call them, but interns. That kind of is similar to the apprentice demo. And those relationships, many of them I still keep today. And that you talk about like wins in your business career, that's one I can't. There's no quantifiable metric other than all these people I could text, call, use as references. And my one thing I told them was, guys, you don't owe me anything. One day when my kids are in the workforce, you go maybe and go out of your way to help them. And so now that statement's on record, Dave. So if they don't follow through, you can hold them to it.
Well, good. I like it. And my kids are almost old enough to actually start to call in favors like that. So I'll steal that idea from you. My experience though has been unbelievable. Very similarly, when we were building Likeable, we had lots of buzz builders, which was our own word for the I word that I don't use. And then, 10 years later, those guys were all in major marketing positions at brands. And we got literally millions of dollars of business from folks that were previously interns at our company. And then they ended up being marketing directors and called us and said, hey, I got business for you. So it does, mentorship, giving back, it really, really does pay off. It's funny you mentioned networking because actually my next question was about networking. I think of you as a fantastic networker. What would you say to college students? What's one sort of tip or thing that they should be thinking about when it comes to networking?
Networking does take time to really master. And again, I was saying using the word before networking because it has different connotations. When you're in college, like that is an amazing environment to build relationships with your fellow classmates. Hopefully, many of them are lifelong friendships, bonds, some around social elements, sports, academics, communities, associations, whatever it may be, but really leveraging the college experience to the max. You would get into this debate: is college worth it? How much should it cost? Scholarships? Who should be paying for it? All the, but if you're there and somebody's funding it, how do you leverage its fullest potential? Because one day when you want to kind of find a community to tap into and build ongoing relationships, you know that you have your college community to tap into, for good or bad, right? If you're in a school that has a certain discipline and you end up working there, obviously that could be amazing. And then others it may not, and you can't necessarily see where how it's all going to play out. So I would say that to a student is highly important. I didn't really maximize. Like I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I went there because it had a good balance of academics, athletics, and social, and I knew that that was important to me. I was an international relations major, so I kind of crossed over econ, poli-sci, and some elements of business. And what I know now, 25 years later, I would have taken fuller advantage of the university offering as opposed to just, maybe the stuff that was easier to connect to.
By the way, Maddie, who's on the call, can confirm that John does say that. And so, for all of you watching live or on the recording, one day there will come a time when John, when you see the last name Fishman and they apply to your company, because you all are going to be running big companies, I am certain, in 10, 15 years. You'll remember this moment.
You don't know anything for her, but I actually took a photo. We had dinner when I was in Miami over the holidays, and I invited one of my favorite summer associates to have dinner with my wife and 2 kids. And he's 6'7", so I always will refer to him. I don't know if I'll ever have a taller intern. He's right now the tallest we've ever had, and a real networking wizard. Great entrepreneur himself. We took a picture of him next to my 7-year-old son, and I think we got like 12,000 views on that post.
Nice.
So
it's funny. One sad but true fact about Apprentice and our model and the pandemic is I've met so few, and everyone has been via Zoom. So I actually know very little, if anything, about the heights of any of our apprentices at this point. Okay. I want to jump back to accelerating growth because that was our promise here, and ask you maybe a loaded question. Marketing or sales? Which is the bigger lever to pull when it comes to growth?
It really depends what type of business you're in, right? Because obviously they're interconnected. Marketing on its own could directly drive sales or indirectly. And then sales, by virtue of its success or what's working, could be intertwined into marketing. So I think it's kind of those two things are depending on the business, both important. You don't want to underestimate either. Funny enough, in business development, we're always referenced in unique ways. So we like to say that we work with both groups, but in some ways we fall in between the two. And growth, like in this day and age, whether you're a B2B company or direct to consumer, how you approach marketing, whether it's more awareness or presence versus digital, direct to consumer marketing. And then I would say that sales as a skill set is something that you also, just like networking, you get better at over time. And you may not think of yourself, as a salesperson, but you always are selling something, right? You're selling yourself, you're selling your business, you're selling the situation. When I first started, the company I worked for was like the largest commercial brokerage company in the city. And I used to say, I don't want to be a broker. And not to say that was the wrong mindset at the time, but if I kind of embraced learning from some of the best, you're doing the largest commercial transactions in the world, that's kind of a learning lesson I've had, is that sales is is kind of a part of everything we do in some way or another. There are different ways to sell, but there's an element of it there.
Totally agree. Per my note in the chat. And speaking of that, I have one more question for John, and then I'm going to open it up to questions from those of you watching live. So post your questions in the chat, or raise your Zoom hand, or let me know if you have a question for Jonathan Fishman of Bizydev. So the question I ask all of our folks, really everyone I have an opportunity to interview, because I learn the most from this question, even if it's a tough one, is what is the biggest mistake of your life, and what did you learn from that mistake?
I know we're in a time period where we have the Great Resignation, and you didn't prepare me for this question, so
no, I didn't. I apologize. I apologize. It's a big one too.
I could give you a bunch of them. I have many answers for it. One that comes to mind is we're in a period where you have this, the Great Resignation. I don't know what the age, the median age is of the Great Resignation. I would assume that it skews younger. I could be wrong. So I would say I was very loyal in my second job that I spent 9 years, and I treated it like it was my own business. I do think it's important to kind of see what's out there. Not that I have any regrets about the time I spent, but I was so loyal and so dedicated to what I was doing that I didn't really understand maybe directionally where I could go. Was maybe just even for validation. Was I truly happy in the role I was in? Is the industry right for me? Is the company culture a good match? And not to say those weren't the case, but I would say it would have been smart to kind of put myself out there, even if I had no intention of officially interviewing or leaving. It's just kind of having a pulse of the market. It will serve you well. At a minimum, you build new relationships. It may trigger something else. And for me, that now is really entrenched in the startup community compared to my 15, 16 years in real estate. You would say, how is someone in real estate able to do business development? And with startups, as a real estate person, I always try to network outside of my direct industry and to build relationships in the creative sector, marketing, technology, on and on and on. And for like where I sit today, I lost my train of thought, but I had a good point there. I would say, we live in a time where you never know where the opportunity will come from, is what I was going to say. And the more people you speak to, the more relationships you build, it could lead to something that, changes the trajectory of your life. Sometimes for a good outcome, or maybe not. And that's kind of looking back, one thing that I wish I'd done more of, because it would have maybe positioned me differently, or accelerated some of the stuff I'm doing today, which took, 17, 18 years to get to.
Love it. So get out there, meet people, take meetings, look for opportunities. Perhaps, dare I say, even loyalty is a little overrated, except loyalty to Apprentice.
Loyalty is important. No. I am a loyal person, right?
Yeah.
I think it's being transparent and being, having that feeling comfortable to express yourself. Because if you're working somewhere, hopefully you're working there for a reason and not just a paycheck. And if something is like on your mind, if you're there, hopefully you're there. And even if something else presents itself, you could address why you want to stay. Or I'm not by any means proposing that there isn't loyalty, Dave, because I even for my own team over time, like I'll roll up my sleeves and do anything to make people hopefully have a good experience if they're deserving.
Well, and I think to go back to what you said earlier, because I can see a parallel, right? There's loyalty, and then there's like heads down stubbornness and refusal to be open, right? So I think what you're saying is, you're not saying be disloyal. You're saying keep your head open, keep your head and mind and heart open to the opportunities that are out there, instead of being closed in the way you think about things. Is that a better assessment of it then?
Yeah. And today, with podcasts and the internet becoming more vast and information, flowing in a more freer fashion, you really could see and learn and understand way more than has ever been possible. And then you layer in the people side, the relationships. Now you combine those two things. You start to figure it out. You learn, you develop your skill set, you have this network. And that's really where the magic happens. It's not, some people, I always get to ask the question, and what we do, what if you run out of relationships? To me, it's almost like the way I have to answer that potentially makes me, who's not this way, come across as, excuse my language, as an asshole, right? Because I'm the only one that knows my relationships. My wife may know some of them, but it's from, I have so many relationships, not to say they're all best friends for life, and it could take me, but in terms of these are people that I could call, lean on, trust my judgment, appreciate, I'm thinking of them. And that comes from years of building those relationships. So kind of just to dumb it down, when people say to me, you just made an introduction, and what, when I bring groups together as a part of what we do, I have to go deep to say it's not just an introduction, or that just took you 2 minutes to send, you shot off one email. What'd you really do for us? I say you have no visibility into the last 5, 10, 15, 40 years of my life, what was done for that person to get to this moment where it's obvious to me and the reaction you're going to get is positive. And that's like kind of where I educate a lot of people I work with, and so they understand like the magnitude of what we're bringing to the table.
Love it. Okay. As promised, to our audience, thank you for asking. Miles wants to know, what are some important tips for college students or recent grads who maybe want to start a business?
I think, nice to meet you, Miles. I would say that there's no harm in starting a business. Number one, it's don't psych yourself out. Dave, I think I forgot the expression you used before, but one of my friends always says, start the process, but do so in a way that if you expect a lot out of that decision, then you should put a lot of time in to be able to start the process. If you're just like, listen, I want to get a little, dabble in entrepreneurship and, kind of start to learn digital marketing by virtue of having a business, or if I meet people, I want to have something to talk about. In those cases, I would say that maybe less time is needed and just get it out there and get started. I am a big believer that starting a business without having worked for someone may not serve you in the long run the best way. I think it's very hard there are success stories, but learning from other people, even if it's not your full-time job, just affiliating, and obviously by virtue of what you're doing with Apprentice, you're work, I assume working for someone else and learning from a mentor, learning from an employer are obviously two different things. And if you're going to ultimately be a good leader yourself and kind of teach and train others as to what you expect of them as they maybe work for your companies down the line, I believe that to be a good leader, you would have had to gone through the trenches yourself. I could talk the talk because I've been an analyst, I've been a director, I've managed people, I've done the real gritty work. So I have no problem telling someone else, this is what's needed, and explaining why, and not over asking them because I know the application, like how much time it's going to take them. Is it a waste? Am I just patting myself on the back by having someone do work? I'm really trying as a leader, and Zoe, who works with me, is put her in a situation that everything she's doing is actually helping the company in some way or another. It's not just, there's no ego involved for us to have to say, oh, we have somebody working on this project if it's meaningless. So a little bit of a tangent there, but
I appreciate it, and frankly, a bit contrarian compared to what I'm ready for all these kids to drop out of school and start businesses. And what I'm hearing you say is, there's some real value in being an employee and getting some experiences working for others in terms of preparing us to take on our own businesses.
Yeah, and Dave, to that point where I'm sorry to cut you, but I just have to say it's you hear a lot of people that say, I can never work for someone else because I can't deal with authority. To me, that is even if someone is that way, you're walking a very slippery slope, because I could tell you that probably translates or extends in other situations. And you may have an investor one day. If you have the mindset that you can't deal with authority, Dave's laughing, but it's very hard to kind of have that mantra and you learn to deal with authority by virtue of working for someone else.
Yeah, no, I'm laughing because I had precisely the same situation. With my second company, I raised a bunch. I know with my first company, I'm all, yeah, things are great. I'm never going to work for anyone again. Then I raised a bunch of money from investors, and I got news I was working for them. So that's this is a life. Okay, now I'm going to zip through. The questions always come fast and furious right at the end when we don't have no time. Rob wants to know what characteristics have you seen across your most successful apprentices / of course mentees and interns and other young folks that have worked for you?
And by the way, Dave, I'm good on time, so you don't have to rush off for me if you need. I have until top of the hour. So I would say being resourceful as a younger person, it helps sometimes people that are more senior because they have a lot on their plate. So resourcefulness, positivity is super important. I want people working with me that recognize like it's not always going to be rosy in everything we do. Just like in my dealings with other people, like there's a lot of pain points and stress points, but resourcefulness, positivity, and like we said before, relentlessness. Self-starter, quasi relentlessness, I think really serves business leaders well. And then ask questions. Obviously, it's hard to always push things forward, and that's totally fine as well.
I am obsessed with that answer. That's all I'm going to say. I'm completely obsessed. Zoe wants to know what are some of the strategies that have helped you in nurturing so many relationships. So clearly, whether you call it networking, relationships, the ability to build such a strong and valuable set of relationships. That doesn't come, doesn't come incidentally. It comes with a lot of real strategy and thinking. I would think.
There is some, but for me, it comes more naturally. I just enjoy being around interesting people. I don't have, as I said, even within real estate, I didn't just say I got a network within the real estate industry. I appreciated what someone was doing and kind of seeing how you connect dots that may not exist today. I think that comes from variety of people, geographies, backgrounds, all those things. Being available is highly important. It's not always about, like, I use Calendly for booking meetings, which is so mainstream now, but I was using it like pre-COVID. And I read a Twitter post recently where someone was like hating on Calendly because they said like, oh, it's all about your schedule. I'm like, no, the whole point is it's about your schedule. Like, I already have stuff locked in before I talk to you. So I'm telling you, you can pick any time you want. It's up to you. I'm accommodating you, but I'm not going to not accommodate myself to accommodate you. But if you say to me, listen, I could only do this time, of course, I'll make an adjustment. So I think making yourself available and then being around people, not just in Zoom, but in interesting situations. So like the other night, Dave, I don't know if you know this, but I invited Rob to come with me to a kind of a networking. One of my clients was hosting a dinner event, which I just thought would be cool for him to be at. He was definitely the youngest person in the room in a good way. And just like him and I will always have that bond and that moment together because we were at that event. Not that we can't remember a Zoom call when we talk about, like, this is a moment, right? We'll remember this conversation. So kind of getting out there and doing interesting things with other people goes a long way.
I love that answer, especially now. It's so freaking easy to be so used to Zoom, and I think post-pandemic, it's really important and valuable to get back out there in the actual real world and see people actually face to face and actually shake hands and hug and all that stuff that we used to do years ago.
Totally.
Shai wants to know if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice, your past self, maybe your, dare I say, your college self or your slightly, post-grad self. What would you tell yourself?
I would say, like, in the workforce, maybe just to be less hesitant to, like, don't create a storyline in your head before you've done something. I'm a somewhat of a deep thinker, but I can also be reactionary. And so I would kind of psych myself out of having a conversation with someone maybe about compensation or about my role in the company or something that would bothered me. So that's, and I even say to my kids, like my daughter was going to an activity today, and she said, she was creating this storyline in her head, and it hadn't even happened yet, about going on the bus to an ice skating event with her school. I'm like, she's telling me the bus is going to be crazy. I go, you didn't even go on the bus yet. It probably will be, but before it happens, kind of let things play out and then respond to it, or go,
So we, some more than others, but we definitely tend to make story. I mean, anxiety basically by definition is making up a story in our head about what's going to happen. And so when we can maybe try to ease up on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And Shai, just one other thing that, again, I feel like I owe it to everyone that's part of this group to do this at scale. So it's helpful. But, I through the years, not just interns, but I've interviewed a lot of people, family, friends, people that submit their resumes, formal hires. And when I'd ask a college student, that's like looking for a job, what they did today, and I actually would hold the apprentice group at a much higher level than probably the norm, just even by virtue of what you guys have all signed up to do. And I give you guys tons of credit. And I give Rob and Dave, and Maddie, people that are part of it, like, you guys are making a real difference in the business world for young people. And that's what I gravitated to when I first learned about Apprentice. But I would say, I meet someone, I say, what'd you do today? When they're looking for a job. And they said, oh, I sent out a resume, or I filled out some, websites. I would say you can always do more. It's too easy to just like feel good about yourself by doing the bare minimum. Like, you need to be, I mean, this is like the most important thing, right? Coming out of college, or where you want to go start your career, assuming you want to work, you need to put everything into that effort, from all sides. It could be from, doing your own LinkedIn stuff, to outreach, to attending events, to connecting with your university, to being part of this. And I still believe that you could always outwork the other person. Like, it's pretty easy to do because the playing field is just inexperienced. So if you, like me, just telling you this, hopefully could be like, minor motivation to be like, okay, I know I could just try different things, whether it's using video, using a traditional resume, using a creative resume. I told Maddie this, months ago, that I had this great creative resume that someone shared with me at some point. And I said, this just to share with others, you'll stand out. If everyone's submitting the same boring looking resume, and you're trying to present yourself in a way that may be above and beyond who you truly are, you might as well do a resume that tells that story, that, speaks to the industry you're going after, or to be more personable than just bullet points.
Awesome. Thank you. And on that note, I'm not seeing additional questions. We are going to wrap just about on time. And I want to thank all of you guys that joined us live, all of you guys that are watching the recording. I want to thank Maddie and Zoe. Maddie for bringing us John, and Zoe for keeping John with us. And most of all, you, John Fishman, thank you so much for everything, of course, for being here today, but more important, for your continued partnership, friendship, and mentorship. I appreciate it immensely, and I look forward to continuing the conversation in all ways. Have a wonderful.
And Dave, to the audience that's here, or maybe people that are listening to the recording, if it's appropriate, like I've said to you, like anyone that wants to pick my brain, needs some advice, whether it's through Apprentice or not. I think if it's appropriate, Dave, like I'm more than happy. LinkedIn's the easiest way to reach out to me. So long as the message doesn't feel like it's coming from Eastern Europe and you do digital marketing, which I get bombarded with, or outsourced, engineering. Short of it coming in feeling or sounding like that, I will try my best to respond immediately.
Awesome.
And be helpful.
Thank you again. We have a great sales crew, some of whom's watching, and some I'm sure that will watch the recording, and so you'll hear from people. So
Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong or prove me right. I'm available to help.
Awesome. Thanks
All
again.
right.
And have a wonderful rest of everyone's Friday and weekend. Bye bye for now.
Thanks, guys.